Hi there. This is Visitations Conversation. The purpose of this program is to provide inspiration for people who are aspiring to go deeper into the world of comics and entertainment. Please check out the channel for interviews that range from comic creators, filmmakers, cosplayers, and podcasts. My name is Scott Larson. I am the creator and illustrator of the independent comic book series Visitations. Visitations is modern history as seen through the eyes of the residents of an old Victorian cemetery. It's uh it's part Untouchables, part Indiana Jones in a graveyard. And if you would like to read a free digital copy of the first issue, please contact me at visitationscomicbook, all one word, at gmail.com. And today I'm really excited because this is the second part of, well, the second time actually, of an interview that I started about a year ago with Mike Carlin. Mike Carlin was one of the executive editors over at DC, and back in the 90s, he had edited the Superman line of books, but he was involved in way more than that. And he worked for DC Animation for a while, and he has since retired. And he's going to talk to us about his life and his career and his view on artwork and things of that nature. So, Mike, you can come on out. Mike,
Uh,
you there?
I'm not getting my
Oh,
picture
okay.
on here.
Oh, you should be able to. So, hold on one second. Let me see if I can do it from here. Okay, I just asked you to start it.
There it goes. All
There it
right,
is. There you
there I
are.
am. That's me. Sorry, everybody.
Oh no, you're fine. And you're back in the same room you were a year and a
This
number
is
of months
the
ago.
this is the Zoom studio.
Uh-huh. And so where did we leave off last time?
I have no idea. I
Okay.
do a lot of podcasts and I I can't remember what I said a half hour after I'm finished with them. So,
So Mike and I were actually talking before we came on. We talked a little bit about that, but there were so the last time what we talked about was we talked about your early years and your time at the School of Visual Arts. We talked about your mom and your uncle and the comic conventions that you went to in 1969.
yep.
And I want to ask you about that a little bit, but we got basically we've just talked about whole range of different things, and so we kind of stopped with your professional career
Okay.
about the time you became an assistant editor for Mark Grunwald.
Okay. And
But
yeah,
I thought,
there was a
okay.
period before the School of Visual Arts where I went to the High School of Art and Design as
Hmm.
well. And oddly, somehow I got to be an intern at DC there. My cartooning teacher said, "We got four internships and you can have one, Mike." And I was like, "Yes, sir, please. I'll do that." And that's where I basically saw that I wanted to draw superhero comics, but I, in Xeroxing real artists, I saw that I was never going to be able to do that. And I turned towards doing more funny stuff. And that got me into Crazy Magazine at Marvel. And by working for Crazy Magazine, Larry Hama, the editor of that magazine, said, "Hey, do you want to be an assistant editor?" And then I got to be Mark Grunwald's assistant after he interviewed me. And I have no idea how many other people he interviewed, but I won. So
Uh-huh.
hooray for me.
So I had a couple of ideas for today, and one of them was this: since we started the beginning and basically went to like I'll call it the middle, but it really wasn't. It was closer to the beginning. I thought maybe we'd start at the end and then go backwards. But I had an idea of something, and I wanted to bounce it off of you. So you had started. What do you remember? What year you worked with Mark Grunwald?
Yeah, I started in the beginning of 82.
Okay, and then
And
you moved to DC in '86.
yeah, I had been at Marvel writing and drawing for Crazy from 81 on. And beginning of 82 is when I got the assistant editor job.
So here's my question. It's going to be a complex question. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so 1982 to 1992. 1992, we all know about the death of Superman stuff, and you've talked about that a lot. And so I'm not going to ask you about that. However, what I am going to ask you about is the 90s were a very different time in the comic book world. And it wasn't just the 90s. I think every era has its own thing. And one of the things that I had noticed right before the image stuff of the 90s, and I think particularly at DC, and I'm not going to include the Superman titles weren't exactly like this, but one of the things that I saw was there are a lot of and you're a baby boomer, but there are a lot of baby boomers who came in, and a lot of the work that was being done in the early 90s was kind of sentimental. It was a looking back kind of a thing. And for example, Green Lantern #1 that came out in 1990, the first page is Hal Jordan, and he's got gray hair, and he's standing on the edge of the cliff, and he's just gonna like throw himself off because there's nowhere else for him to go because he's lived his whole life. And the thing that was interesting about that was a lot of those creators were in their 30s at the time.
Mhm.
And then it was followed up by like this craziness of like blood and guts and knives and stuff like that. And so I'm wondering if you could describe a little bit the transition from the more sentimental stuff to the more like crazy, blood-soaked world that we found ourselves living in.
Well, I don't know if I would call this stuff sentimental. I I do think that the 80s definitely changed what comics were doing.
Hmm.
Uh, More by the mid 80s. Marvel's early 80s was kind of like it was it was good Marvel comics, but they
Hmm.
weren't that different. I guess the most different thing was Walt Simonson's Thor was probably just the most visually different. Then you got the debut of people like Bill Sienkiewicz. So the art was pushing it a little bit. And then when you got to 86, and DC wasn't doing that as much except for one title, which was New Teen Titans by two Marvel guys, Marv
Hmm.
Wolfman and George Perez. So they started doing a DC book in Marvel style. So it was a little more soap opera and a little more, and I guess that's the sentimental part, maybe the soap opera-ness of it. Uh, but everybody was also kind of dying for something really different to happen. And then you got Watchmen and you
Hmm.
got Dark Knight Returns. And Dark Knight Returns was a literal reaction to the fact that we couldn't get away from, in comics, we couldn't get away from the idea that the Batman TV show in the 60s was what comics were. Because
Hmm.
anytime anybody wrote about comics, it was a pow, zap, wham, bam. And it just like I loved the Batman show, but I was 6 years old, and we definitely wanted the comics to grow up a little bit.
Hmm.
So what you're talking about with Hal Jordan and his gray sidewalls and all that is just like it's a more mature look right off the bat. And then the stories were taken more seriously. There was a lot less, craziness because the comics of the 60s and 70s, especially DC comics, they were kid stuff, but they were gonzo. There was some crazy stuff going on there. Not the least of which was hypno glasses on
Hmm.
Clark Kent, which I love the last movie that just came out,
Hmm.
except for the hypno glasses. I think it was just because it's in a comic doesn't mean it's a good idea. So anyway, but things were just weird like that. And then you weren't allowed to be weird anymore, really. You had to kind of be very down to earth, even though you were talking about a flying man or
Hmm.
a flying woman. And it's like the comics just it became a one-upmanship and a can you top this thing. And I do think that there was a little more once the image guys came on the scene, everybody was reacting to them
Hmm.
because they were doing something different. They were all visual. It was just visual. The stories, I couldn't even tell you what any of the stories were, but they were all visual and they were selling. So everybody was reacting to that stuff, including us on Superman. It wasn't that we were jealous of it or anything. It was, you're going to tell me that these new things are better than Superman, who is definitely old school, but he's still valuable. He's a good thing for the world. So we made it our business to try to remind people why Superman was a good thing.
Sure.
And that worked for us, and our sales went up, and everything was going up. And again, you you play that can you top this thing? And the blood and guts was also kind of a thing that was going on in movies at the time too. The horror movies are getting more and more gory. I just watched an episode of The Boys today, and it's just like this is as gratuitous as I've ever seen anywhere, and it's going to get blamed on comic books,
Mhm.
you
It's
know?
it's a pretty bloody show. So I want to follow up on that real quick. So you mentioned the Batman TV series, and I recently saw an interview with you on the documentary for the
Oh
DVD
yeah.
set. And you mentioned Robin being eaten by the clam.
So Bruce Timm mentioned it too. That was the episode, man.
Oh, I remember, and it scared the crap out of me as a kid. And one of
Yeah.
the things that I found lately is somebody gave me the box set a couple years ago, and I tried to watch the first episode, and as soon as the Bat Dance came on, I'm like, I can't do
It
this.
was a good
But
episode up until that.
it was, I've gotten about I'm about halfway done with the show now. And the thing that I found about it was how accurate it was to those 1950s comics. I mean, it was over the top, but
Yeah.
I almost feel like, and I'm curious to see if I don't know when the last time you watched it was, but you could almost push it in a certain direction and have it be as serious as Watchmen.
Oh yeah.
It was, and I could see why that show creeped me out
Oh
as a
really?
kid.
Hmm.
It was weird. It was a weird show.
Well, it was weird, and the thing is, I saw it in real time, and I was definitely the target audience for it, and there were also wasn't that many other options, you know.
Right.
I got, Adventures of Superman reruns, and that was it.
Hmm.
We didn't even have Super Friends yet, so there wasn't even cartoons of
Right.
this stuff. So it was the only port in the storm.
Hmm.
So uh, it was valuable. And to me, again, when I was 6 and Robin was getting eaten by a clam, that was as real as anything.
Oh yeah.
But I agree with what you're saying that they were kind of doing the Dick Sprang Batman from the
Hmm.
50s
Hmm.
with all the giant typewriters and all that kind of stuff, and all the death traps were giant things. And it's almost like everything is like 10 years behind when they translate it into
Uh-huh.
film. But also, you say Watchmen, Batman could have been played as a Watchmen thing. Don't forget, the Watchmen is really based on the Charlton characters
Right.
who came out in the 60s.
Hmm.
So it's really that kind of, they were as, if you want to say that superheroes were corny, they were as corny as Marvel and DC were back then,
Hmm.
and it's like, there's room for corniness in the world, I think. I think there's plenty of space for that kind of thing. In fact, I think I lament periodically, I don't know if I did it on your show, but my abilities lend themselves more to doing stuff that's funnier, and that I regret that a lot of superhero readers and fans seem to have no sense of humor
Hmm.
or don't want their heroes to have a sense of humor. Whereas I look at Spider-Man comics and I say, this is a guy who's cracking wise, and that's funny. Comedy
Hmm.
relief is a good thing,
Hmm.
but if you put up what's a comedy comic book that lasted a long time, Gru, I'm sure Gru is a great, fun, funny comic, but it's not selling as much as dour, serious
Right.
Batman, so the audience isn't there for that kind of stuff. So yeah, you could have done Batman like that. The Batman movies that came in the late 80s, were that. They were the
Hmm.
serious and grim until they weren't again,
Right,
like pretty quickly.
right,
But
right, right,
fourth
right.
movie, it was nipples and skates coming out of your shoes, and it was it was a mess. And credit cards, bat credit cards.
I know.
That's my favorite part. It's like, what bank are you using for that?
So you had the gritty 90s and then you move out of that.
Hmm.
And before, so with my DC history, you had that early 2000s where things were kind of, I feel like comics were trying to find their footing again. And then at DC, you had, the identity crisis and the infinite crisis and and what came out of that. And you were still involved in all that stuff.
Yeah,
And you were editing Justice Society at the second series
yeah.
at the end there before the new 52. And so I'm curious, what were the differences between like I'll call them the bloody 90s and then the 2000s coming out? What was the difference in not only the comics, but the tone and the way you guys approached it?
Well, the in the early 2000s, my contract came up. I was the executive editor and a VP, and I just was like, Paul Levitt said, "What do you want to do going forward?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what I don't want to do. I don't want to just sit here and take attendance, and I
Mhm.
don't want to be the guy who's getting in trouble for what other guys do. I'll get in trouble for what I do,
Mhm.
but I just don't want to. I just want to edit comic books." So I took a step backwards and I took a big pay cut, and I just said, I'll go be an editor again." So there was a new executive editor, and that was Dan DiDio. So a lot of it was, some of it was his taste and people figuring out, what he wanted or what he instructed people to do. And it's going to give you a different voice every time you have a new boss at the top.
Sure.
And it should. And when I was the boss, I made it my business not to just put out comics that I liked.
Hmm.
'Cause I mean, I'm not really a Lobo guy, but
Uh-huh.
I saw the appeal of Lobo. I saw why people like Lobo, and that was a good thing. And obviously, DC saw that, Vertigo was a good complement to what DC was doing, and it brought in a whole different audience too, which was smart because if everything is the same, it's not good. And
Hmm. Hmm.
I do think giving people a choice is fine, and they can't all work equally as well. And luckily, we were owned by a movie studio at DC. And they knew that some years you have a giant hit and some years you don't. So they didn't really pester us to keep topping ourselves. We wanted to top ourselves, but we also knew it's just not possible to keep going up. You just can't. In a creative field, you can't keep going up. You go up, you go down, you go around, you go all kinds of places. So, it's like I think people were trying to figure it out and maybe experimenting a little bit. I think in a way everything is cyclical and we
Hmm.
went back to just the serious comics. And for me, it was always about the characters and their relationships to each other, including, and that goes for superheroes as well. It's like Identity Crisis, for whatever people's opinion of that story, it's still a personal story for all the
Hmm.
superheroes. And it was one of those can you top this kind of situations, but it was about the people involved, not the
Hmm.
superheroes, not the powers. And I when I approached Justice Society and Justice League, I looked at those books as places where this is where the superheroes get together, like policemen or firemen. They go to the bar and they talk policeman stories and fireman stories, and then they don't bring it home to their families, maybe. So that's the way I looked at those books. Whereas the Superman title itself, it was all about the people of Metropolis. It was not only about Superman. It was about everybody who worked at the Daily Planet. It was about Bibbo. It was about people on the street. It was about everybody else. It wasn't just a superhero book. If anything, it was more about the people of Metropolis to show us why Superman cared about anything. But then he can't really talk to Lois about going into outer space and landing on a planet where there's aliens that want to punch him in the nose. She just has not had that experience. But Martian Manhunter has,
Mhm.
and Wonder Woman has. So that's where the Justice League book comes in as a different flavor. That's a different place to go. So I try to find, when I take over a title or whatever, I just try to find what the humanity of that story is. And unfortunately, I think a lot of comics in the 2000s, both at Marvel and DC, all the way up till now, only recently have I started seeing comics that have the civilian characters involved in the stories again. It's like it was just too many super people. And
Mhm.
it was just I'm meeting my super friend and I'm gonna fight the super villains. And it just was like this is not stuff people can identify with because we don't have powers. I mean, we have certain abilities that are unique to each and every one of us, but this story isn't reflecting that. It's just people punching or
So why do you
rescuing
think
each
that
other.
is? Well, I mean, why do you think so you feel that comics in general had moved from the more personal to the more, we'll call it cosmic.
Yeah,
We'll
well,
call it cosmic. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think maybe because the creators who were coming into the business, that's the part of the comics that they liked.
Uh-huh.
So that's what they would do. I think sometimes they thought that's what their editors wanted. Maybe they
Hmm.
thought that's what the readers wanted. And maybe for a little bit of time they did. But again, I think that if there's one or two titles that are like that, and then everything else has a personal story to it,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's a better universe. That's
Hmm.
definitely a more varied universe, and I think that's a better place. And I've only read a few. Uh, I believe that the Superman books these days are pretty well done, and they're bringing in a lot of the civilian characters and making them part of the story again, which I think is great. Inventing new characters is great. All that stuff is good, but not everybody needs to be super. You need to have somebody to compare to the Superman. You need to have somebody to react to the Superman. And I think they've been starting to do that again in the last 5 years. And I think that's great. I think that that's good for the business. And obviously DC has had a really great year last year with their absolute books.
Hmm.
And again, I don't read a lot of comics, partly because I was taught by Julie Schwartz when he retired, he would come into the office and I would say, "So what do you think about what we're doing?" He goes, "I don't read it. I'm not going to read it. It's not my thing, and I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel superior. I don't want to feel anything. So I don't check it out." And I was like, "All right, I get that." I said, "You have no advice for me at all?" And he goes, "Yeah, I do. I do. The Gillette Mach 5 razor blade is the best
Hmm.
shave I've ever gotten, and you should get some of those." So I did. And he
You
was
know,
right.
the interesting thing about that statement you just made is that's exactly where we left off on the last
Oh,
in our
really?
last conversation. So
That
we've come
that's one
full
of my go-to
circle.
stories, I guess.
It is. Um, so
But it's
so you're
also not
not
a lie.
really.
I mean, he would not he refused to offer advice, and I think that that's
Do you
partly
think he was
because
reading the stuff at all or no?
I don't think he was. Look, there's a point where, like I said, I want to read the real books. I
Yeah.
want to admire other people's creativity
Uh-huh.
in movies and TV. And movies they're doing comics nowadays, so there's plenty of that there.
Sure.
Like I said, I watched The Boys this morning, and that's like
Mhm.
reading a comic book. And it's like the Invincible is out there, and everything is comics. So I just
So,
don't. I don't know. It feels like it's almost like I ate ice cream for 50 years, and now
uh,
want to get some vegetables.
I understand that. So my wife and I were watching The Boys, and I told her that before we needed to go to bed, before we went to bed, we had to watch a comedy to get the taste of that thing out of our mouths
Yeah,
because it's so super
it's
violent.
pretty rough.
It is. So let me ask you a question. you worked with Dan Jurgens for a really long time.
Hmm.
And I was looking at his stuff, and I think it was his first book for DC, which was an issue of Detective, right before um
Doug Mensch.
right before he took over.
Uh-huh.
Jerry Conway was still working on the book. It was
Mhm.
right before they made the switch to Jason Todd and Robin and all that.
Right.
And I think that was the first story he ever did. And I remember his first days on Superman and the stuff with Hank Henshaw and
Uh-huh.
before he became the cyborg. And I remember looking at that issue with Toyman, where Toyman murders Cat Grant's son.
Hmm.
And if you take a look at the artwork from that first thing he did
Uh-huh.
and the Hank Henshaw thing and that Cat Grant thing, three different styles completely. And
Yeah.
I'm curious about the growth of creativity that you saw while you were working. And was there anything that happened that impressed you, that you noticed, and you're like, oh, wow, that's really interesting?
Well, the impression came right at the beginning. It's like I took it very seriously when John Byrne left the Superman books.
Mhm.
I knew that I had one shot to try to make sure I didn't bleed readers. And so I gave Jerry Ordway a shot at being a writer for his own material because I saw how much he contributed to the Marv Wolfman stuff, and he did a great job. And I had I sat in an office next to uh, Barbara Kiesel, and she, I think, was working on Booster Gold with Dan. And I saw his pencils come in, and I saw the pencils, and I was impressed that how clean they were. It reminded me of a lot of what Burns stuff looked like. And
Mhm.
I thought, all right, I have an annual. Jim Starlin is going to write it. This is, I've already got a name on it, so let me put this guy on it and see what we can do. And he did a great job on it. And it was always like all artists kind of grow as they go along. I think in terms of what you're talking about, I think he adjusted his style for the content,
Yeah.
and I think that, the Jerry Conway Detective Comic stuff was still early 80s DC, so it was a little lighter tone. It wasn't as heavy. And the Toyman story was as heavy as we ever got in the Superman
Right.
books. Uh, and a lot of people still hate that story because it got too heavy for them. But we were trying to just make Toyman a consequential villain. And
Hmm. Hmm.
did we go too far? Everybody has their own opinion about that, and it's like, and it's okay to, in my mind, in my book, to have crossed a line because we needed to be moving forward.
Hmm. Hmm.
And did we cross the right line? Maybe we shouldn't have done that. Maybe we should have. But ultimately, we made Toyman a real villain
Hmm.
and not just a clown.
Hmm. The thing about that issue, about the artwork, and this isn't a commentary on the story,
Hmm.
but the artwork, I think, in my opinion, is so wonderful. It takes my breath away. And every once in a while, you'll see artwork like that where it's just like, oh my God. And I think that that's the best work he ever did
Hmm.
in that respect, the way I personally reacted to it. Because there's one thing where he's got the balls bouncing and they're like right in front of the camera, and
Yeah.
it was just really, really interesting. So I'm curious. So this feeling that I'm talking about, and it doesn't have to be Dan, and it doesn't have
But
to
I do
be
think I do
anybody
think you're
else.
reacting to the story as well as the art
Sure,
because Dan
sure,
reacted to the story in
sure.
his art, and then your feeling of just the whole tone of his art went hand in hand with the story.
Hmm.
And you almost can't separate the words and the pictures when we're doing this stuff. And I think that was what your reaction was to the whole package.
Yeah, well, so a number of years ago, and you probably don't remember this. I know you don't remember this. So you had seen a movie on Facebook, and I had seen the same movie. We didn't watch on Facebook, and it was The Master. with
Oh,
Joaquin Phoenix.
yeah.
And I hated the movie. I
Yeah,
couldn't stand the film. And
I didn't like it either.
you didn't because on Facebook you said that you
Well,
did
I
enjoy it.
know I don't remember what I said about it, but I remember I I was on a real Philip Seymour Hoffman uh, you know, kick at that point.
Uh-huh.
And I just really enjoyed watching him as an actor
And
in
maybe
pretty
that's what it
much
was.
anything. And I just didn't think the story went far enough, for what it was about. It's
Sure.
supposedly about L. Ron Hubbard, and it just didn't get close enough to the Scientology stuff
Right.
that it
Right.
should have, that ultimately. And I've also never felt the need to watch it again.
I feel that same way. Actually, when I went to see it, because the previews looked really cool, and the art direction on that film was really interesting. And there
Yeah.
was the one thing I remember about it was there was like a split screen where they were on a boat, and half of the screen was the water, and then the
Uh-huh.
other half was the guy walking on the boat, or something like that. And I had called that out on your post
Hmm.
15 years ago, and I don't understand why I don't remember that now.
How can you
But
remember these things?
but um but I
Facebook is meant to not be remembered, by the way.
no.
You know.
But the thing with that movie, I was dating my the person who became my wife. We're sitting there watching the movie, and within the first 10 minutes, I was like, I'm sorry, we'll go see anything you want to see the next time. But going back to what I was saying, so I mentioned that artwork like kind of took my breath away. And I've had several things that I've seen or I've read that have done that. And I'm curious, is there anything in comics? It doesn't have to be anything you worked on or anything, Dan worked on or Jerry or John Byrne or anything. Was there anything that you saw that if it didn't take your breath away, it just almost like slapped you in the face where it's like, wow, this is incredible.
A lot of my face slapping days happened before I got in the business. Uh,
Okay.
and it's what made me want to get in the business.
Hmm.
And that was again by being an intern, I got to see a lot of, Bernie Wrightson originals in person. And, nowadays we have those artist editions that
Yeah.
Scott Dunbier puts out. They're pretty much the only things that I actually spend money on these days because it's like just seeing the black and white art is inspirational. It's really amazing to see all the work of anybody, whoever your favorite artist is, even your least favorite artist. It's just interesting to see this stuff. So I got to see that stuff, but I also, my we go back to my mother again now. My mother was somebody who she liked comics before I was born. She was a Superman fan. She liked Wonder Woman, and she also loved the EC horror comics. And the first hardcover book I bought with my own money was a collection of EC horror stories.
Hmm.
And they had, this is during, the 40s, late 40s and early 50s. And the superhero comics was still drawn by people who were maybe not the greatest artists. Or it was just like they were just hustling it out and they were trying to just, I don't know, pay their bills on a low page rate. But the EC artists like Ghastly Ingalls and even Jack Davis, who was a different flavor, but it was still so intricate and so beautiful. Wally Wood, all of these guys were doing the best work in comics. And so I bought this book, and it was an oversized book, and it printed the stuff big. And there was a story in there by Bernie Krigstein, and it's the most famous story now called The Master Race. And it is the most cinematic thing I've ever seen in a comic book. And it's a powerful story to start with, but he just drew this stuff. It's so amazing, and it was such a strong story that when I did get into the High School of Art and Design, he was a teacher there,
Hmm.
but I was afraid to take his class. I was scared of him because the story was so heavy. And
Hmm.
so it was too, I didn't, if I met him, I didn't want him to ruin what I felt about this story.
Yeah.
So it was like I didn't know that's what I was thinking, but I think that's what I was thinking. It was like I was afraid because the story is a scary story, but I
Hmm.
was also afraid that I didn't want to ruin it and or find out that he's a jerk or whatever. I didn't want to get into that world. But that happened before I got in the business, and it's the
Hmm.
story that everybody should look at, and it's called Master Race by Bernie Kriegstein. I don't know whether it was a Tales from the Crypt or if it was a Vault of Horror. I don't know exactly what book it was in, but all of your listeners and viewers probably either know it or can find it pretty easily. It's a good one.
That's really interesting. I feel like I've seen that, and I'm not sure. Well,
Probably
I
have it.
probably have.
I think it's the Citizen Kane of comics because it really is very cinematic and it does some things that nobody else has ever tried to recreate.
Hmm.
Just amazing tricks
Hmm.
and but tricks used at the right point and to service the story, and it's just like really great stuff.
When
That's
you
your
were,
homework assignment, class.
yes. Oh, yeah, and I've written it down. Um, so when you work with somebody like, say, John Byrne, or when you've worked with him, or anybody else, do you find that and I mentioned the thing with Dan Jurgens and the balls bouncing in the front of the thing. Um, do you find that people, because things have to be done quickly, because people don't have that much time,
Mhm.
unless they're doing it themselves like me, in which case you have all the time in the world. It just takes a while to get stuff
Right.
done. Um, did you find that people would be more straightforward and less willing to experiment as far as artwork was concerned or writing was concerned?
Well, I mean, the stuff is a little bit of a treadmill. You gotta be there every month. And Jurgens is one of the more reliable guys in the business
Hmm.
still to this day. And then there's other guys who they take a little more than a month to do something, so you got to plan fill-ins accordingly, and that would be my job to do that kind of stuff. And a couple of fill-ins by a guy is when you find the next guy to take over when somebody leaves. So it, uh, it was it was a process. I do think that like unless something is just flat out wrong or misleading or doesn't do the story service, we didn't have time to change everything, and I didn't have time to
Right.
have bright ideas to feed to the guys on everything. And they, I stuck with the guys I stuck with because they did a good job and they did things that I wouldn't have thought of, like the balls or whatever.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's like that's what I'm paying them for is like to have a contribution, a creative contribution to the stuff. And so yeah, everybody's different. John Byrne is another guy who's fast and reliable. He was also a guy, and I probably said this in the last podcast, but he was a guy who had his finger on the pulse and was doing comics that were selling and working and people generally liked. So I'm not going to mess with that guy
Sure.
as much as I am with a new guy or a guy who's struggling and
Hmm.
or a guy who needs the help, because not everybody has all the pieces put together yet. And I think a good editor knows when to hold them and when to fold
Hmm.
them.
So,
Yeah.
as an editor, you found yourself in different positions where it was like, oh my God, what do I do now? Like with John Byrne leaving, I'm assuming he gave you a little bit of time.
Nope.
Okay.
That was an
So, well, that's a real
emergency.
good example, but I
That was
do
a
want.
stop the presses scenario.
And I was talking to somebody else about people who have to end their books, their runs early, or they choose to do their runs early. And with some people, if they have an opportunity, they try to wrap things up.
Mhm.
And my feeling with John Byrne was he just didn't care. Beginning of the story,
He cared about it. There was a couple of things working against him staying around.
yeah,
Some of it was personal stuff that I'm not going to get into.
sure.
And some of it was just that he wasn't happy with everything that DC was doing. Like they were still licensing uh Superman material from before he was on the books instead
Mhm.
of saying this is the new Superman out there in the regular world. And I think that that's a valid criticism. It's like if the company is going to say, here's the new Superman, then everywhere should say, here's the new Superman and be the new Superman. So, he did 2 years and he also, every people forget he was writing two books,
Oh, I know.
drawing two books,
He
and then
did way over 100.
he was writing three books for the last year that he was there because Marv left. And he was writing miniseries and annuals and uh, he did so many Superman things. He did about 6 years worth of material
Mhm.
in 2 years. So people who complain that he just left too soon, it's like I think he left when he was getting burnt out, if
Sure.
anything. Yeah, so I don't think it was that he didn't care about it. I think he just couldn't get it to happen the way he wanted it to happen.
But so you were editing him on Fantastic Four when he left
Yeah,
too. And
yeah,
his last issue was part one of a three-part story.
yeah.
So
Well,
how did that work?
you'll have to talk to him
Okay.
about why he left.
Oh, well, actually, I'm not concerned so much about that. I don't care about rumors. I mean, I'm always happy to hear
Well,
any,
but if somebody leaves on part one of a three-part story,
yeah,
there's usually a why that
sure,
that causes that because that there was a plan there.
sure.
And what I did was I hired Roger Stern to write the
Mhm.
next couple of issues, and Roger was good friends with John, so he just picked up what John was intending to do and went with it.
So how did you, so as his editor at that particular point, you mentioned it was a five alarm fire for Superman. Was it a five alarm fire for the Fantastic Four as well?
No, because Superman, first of all, Fantastic Four was only one title a month.
Yeah.
Superman was at that point three titles,
Hmm.
uh, and action was going away. It was going to become a weekly
Right,
comic.
right.
But since Byrne was writing and drawing Superman in action, we were going to just publish Superman twice a month. So
Hmm.
it would be Superman, Adventures of Superman by Ordway and Byrne, and then another Superman by Byrne.
Oh,
But
okay.
when he left, we just cut out the second Superman book and said,
Uh-huh.
all right, for 5 minutes, we're going to be two books.
Hmm.
And then we got action back. And then we added Man of Steel after that. So we rebuilt it up slowly.
Hmm. Hmm.
And again, the sales were not the same as when Byrne was there. But Byrne also wasn't new. By the time he left, he wasn't the fresh face guy on
Right.
Superman anymore either. So it was like it wasn't that hard to keep people interested. And we did do stories. I think that the guys I hired and the idea of doing a weekly comic book saved the day.
Hmm.
I think that that made us unique again. It made us the only guy doing that in comics. And Ordway and Stern, they got along well with each other. The phone calls were easy to handle.
Hmm.
It was when we got to be three and four titles a month, and it was, more writers and pencilers and involving everybody that it just became that we had to have a meeting every year to sort things out. So it became harder and harder to do. But right at the beginning, it was easy to do that stuff. And the fact that Byrne left on a story where he had Superman do something that Superman shouldn't do, which was kill the
Hmm. General
uh
Zod.
the Phantom Zone
Right.
villain. Uh it gave us some fodder to do something that had never been done before, which was to have Superman have a mental breakdown.
Right.
He's a super strong guy. He still had his powers, but he couldn't handle what he had done. Same as the readers couldn't handle what he had done. So it gave him a real identity crisis, and he was running around town acting like he was Gangbuster and Superman at the same time. And then he finally said, "You know what? I'm I don't trust myself. So he just banished himself into outer space. And we got what we called the exile story, where he exiled himself into space until he worked out his problems, and then he came back, So, but it was a good long story that showed that there are consequences to your actions, so
Hmm.
even if you're Superman. And that was it was important to us. And it also gave us the soap opera and connectivity of, if you left one issue on one planet, you started the next one on that
Hmm.
planet, and then he went away somewhere else. I also had a good artist in Kerry Gamble,
Hmm.
who is very John Byrne like in terms of what his stuff looks like. I think Kerry could have been the next John Byrne if he was a little faster or a lot faster.
Uh-huh.
But I feel like I got more work out of him in the year or two that he was on the books than anybody ever got out of him. And he did a good job, and he was a great contributor, and he loved Superman. And
Hmm.
that was another key, was getting people who loved Superman, and who understood the mantle that we were being handed. It was like it was so important that Superman be a viable hero and not just the guy left in the dust by the Image Comics or whatever.
How did you find Carrie Gamble? Where did he come from?
Well, I worked at Marvel, and he was doing stuff at Marvel.
Uh-huh.
He was doing Power Man and Iron Fist for a couple of issues. So he was always kind of around. And then I got sent, I replaced somebody who was going to a convention in Texas. This was back in the day where you could just have a plane ticket, and if you couldn't go, you just handed it to the next person. You didn't have to have ID and all that stuff. You could fly anywhere you wanted to on a ticket.
Right.
So I think
Hmm.
John Romita Jr. was supposed to go to a convention, and he couldn't go. So they picked me to go in his place. I don't know why. Not quite equal. And I met Kerry in his hometown in Texas, and we got along. That's
Hmm.
a lot of it is just getting along with people too, you know. But this was also an era where, we didn't have Zoom, and I worked with a lot of people who I never met, and you just either talk to them on the phone. There was no email, and I didn't know what they looked like. I didn't know what religion they were. I didn't know what
Uh-huh.
color they were in some cases. And it was like, that was a good way to work because that took
Hmm.
out a lot of bullshit.
Hmm. Hmm.
But Kerry was a good guy, and he really is a great artist. And so we got along. And when there was an opening on Superman, he was the right guy to go to. And I had Ron Friends do a couple of annuals. So, and he's another really good artist and a great storyteller.
He was my favorite growing up.
Hmm.
Because I was reading his stuff on Star Wars and then on Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to him a lot. I think I spent like 8 hours talking to him
Wow.
over Zoom. So we had a lot of really, really great conversations. And we talked about those Superman annuals.
Yeah.
And so there was the first one he did
It was the
with,
Titano one.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the second one was the Newsboy Legion.
Yeah. With Stern.
Right. And then he ended up, were you still editing the books when he came on, or were you just
I
like kind of
was
overseeing things?
I was probably handing the book off at that point.
You're right.
I got him, and I guess Michelini on one of the books then.
I think he was.
Yeah, I don't think they were working together, but yeah, that was a period of, like, it started becoming Joey Cavalieri and Casey
Right.
Carlson, but I was
Right.
their bosses. So,
And then when he left, actually, I'll mention this because I mentioned this with Dan Jurgens. He and his brother
yeah,
worked on a three-part story. And I didn't read any of this stuff when it was actually coming out. And I've been I had sold off my entire comic book collection except for the Superman Exiled story, just so you're aware of
oh,
it. I
okay.
did like that one very much. Um, and I started recollecting Superman, and I wish that you guys had made those little triangles a little bigger because I can't read what year it is. But the first part of that story, it's like I said, the thing with Dan Jurgens and the Toyman took my breath away. But his artwork on that first part of that Superman story, Ron
Yeah.
Friend, I think it was like some of the best stuff I've ever seen him
Well,
do.
it may have been more personal too because it was
Yeah,
his brother's story, and he was getting a chance to be a literal co-writer on stuff, which he
yeah.
doesn't always get. I think he, I think he's done a lot of stuff with Tom DeFalco where he is the co-writer
Hmm. Hmm.
since then. And but yeah, I love that Strange Visitor story. I thought that was the thing that I think we did the best over everybody on our Superman titles was we would do stories and 3 years later we would do something that grew out of that. A little tree would come from some idea, and that Strange Visitor was basically the Superman blue costume
Right.
on a female character, but it made her a whole new character, and it wasn't just Superman in a different suit. It was a new character, and that kind of stuff that wasn't planned at the beginning when we did Superman Red and Superman Blue.
Hmm.
There was no Strange Visitor as part of the story, but it was just it's a Superman element, a strange visitor from another planet. It's an S, so you have the S on the chest. And it's just like, it seems so obvious that we had to have planned it from the start, but we didn't.
Hmm.
Hank Henshaw was not the cyborg when we started him. He was just a Reed Richards ripoff, you
Right.
know. And it's like, even the Eradicator, that was part of the Exile
Right.
storyline. He came back as the Krypton Man, tried
Right.
to terraform Earth into a new version of Krypton. And then a couple of years later, he became something else. And it's like, it's all connected because not only were we looking forward, we were looking backwards at the same time.
Hmm.
And in general, I did that all the time on the Superman books. It's like Superman had such a big history, and it was such an important thing to me when I was a kid that I would watch Adventures of Superman and they would have an episode called Panic in the Sky.
Hmm.
What do I steal? It's just a title. I took it and I used it, and it was perfect.
Hmm.
But it was like going forward and looking back at the same time. I was reverential to the old stuff. I was letting people know that we knew the old stuff. So we're not just, bums coming in to wreck your favorite character. The reign of the Superman the title is based on the very first Superman story that Siegel and Schuster did, which was a prose story called Reign of the Superman.
Hmm.
And it's like everything old is new again. And it becomes a thing that builds on top of it. And it's just like it keeps the character alive. It keeps what Superman is alive because Spider-Man can't do a Reign of the Spider-Man story because that's our title, you know.
Uh-huh.
And same with Panic in the Sky. If he did a Panic in the Sky story, it it would just be a ripoff rather than
Hmm.
a fromage.
Right.
And that's what we were doing. I mean, we wanted it to be clear that we knew our stuff and we were going somewhere you have not gone before. We knew what the old Superman Red and Superman Blue story was. We weren't going to do that. We did our own version. At the time, people hated it. Now they apparently love it.
Hmm.
So, hooray for us.
So you were still editing comics in about 2011. Were you still doing stuff when the New 52 started, or had you moved out
No,
to California by then?
no, I was 2010, December 25th, 2010 is the day I moved to
Okay.
LA.
Okay.
And I had done my last editing work at that point, which some of it may have come out in 2011. Like the best thing I was doing at that time was that book Legacies that Len Wein wrote. It was
Yeah.
kind of a retrospective of
Yeah.
stuff, and it was really a great book. And I I think it was a great book for Len to have done in his
Yeah.
career. Uh, so that was, that was fun. But then I came and started being kind of like, the gatekeeper for DC stuff with Warner Brothers
Right.
Animation. And I've always said I feel lucky because they had to do all the hard stuff. They had to hire and fire artists and writers. They
Hmm.
had to decide what they were going to spend their money on. And all I did was read the stories and say, maybe this character wouldn't do that, but how about you try this character instead and put stuff like that in there. And it's just like, and they loved our stuff more than we did,
Hmm.
so they were great partners to work with. And if there was ever an argument or two, it was really minor, and it wasn't even an argument. It was just a disagreement. And
Hmm.
uh, they just did great stuff. And in a way, I feel bad that there's less and less stuff. We had so much stuff coming out at one point where when I first got there, we were doing three features a month, three features a year. And they were talking about cutting it down to two because DVDs were dying.
Hmm.
Then streaming came along and they said, oh, way. And we were doing six or seven a year. And it was just like, this is great. And they were done for all different ages. And we had the Lego stuff
Uh-huh.
going at the time. And we had these DC superhero girls for young little girls. And it's just like there was so much stuff going on. They were doing shorts for something called DC Nation
Hmm.
on Saturday mornings. And there was so much creativity going on at that time. Like, I don't know if you want to hunt down stuff on YouTube, I bet you can find it, but the Dead Man shorts that they did are cute and awesome. They're just great stuff. There was Shanghai Batman that was just a great, Asian flavored anime
Hmm.
style Batman. And there's so many really great things. The Wonder Woman was just three little shorts, but they're beautiful. Robert Valley was the guy who did those, and they're just great. And it was a place to be really free while Young Justice and at the beginning, Green Lantern anchored an hour, and in between, they would get these little shorts in there. So there was just a lot of creativity, and none of that happens anymore. It's a kind of a bummer.
Do you feel that your leap from comics to cartoons with the animation stuff, do you feel like that was a growth moment? And if so, in what way?
I don't think it was a growth moment. I think it
Okay.
was just a sidestep. And
Okay.
basically, when I went to the High School of Art and Design, I took animation classes there. I took animation classes at the School of Visual Arts. The difference is by the time I got into doing animation, they weren't done the same ways that I learned, because
Mhm.
now it's all done on computers and that kind of stuff. So I couldn't possibly have done an animation, but I understood the process.
Uh-huh.
And to me, it was the same job. I was editing stories, making suggestions, offering ideas. Uh, the big difference for me, the only difference I think, was that I got to be in on some of the casting. So
Well, that's fun.
because yeah, and we don't have sound in comics.
Right.
So just thinking of all right, what would the character sound like? One of the ones that I got through that I felt very, like I had made my day was we were doing the Judas Contract, the Teen Titans story.
Hmm.
And they were like, who can we get to be Terra in this? And I suggested Christina Ricci, and she was up for it, and she did it, and it was perfect. And it was just like, all right, this is not anything you have to think about when you're doing comics. So that was the only thing that was a little different. I also didn't have to worry about the deadlines, so I only worried about the stories
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
Warner Animation worried about deadlines and stuff.
Speaking of audio, I recently, we were talking earlier before we came on that I've been listening to like more audiobooks and stuff, and DC has produced that high volume Batman, which is Batman Year One and the Long Halloween and all that.
Uh-huh.
And the worst part about that is they get you addicted to it, and then it ends, and then you're like hunting for other stuff, and it's almost impossible to find anything. But one of the things that I found was the Superman Doomsday audiobook. And I was really surprised as I've been listening to it. I just started it,
Is this the
but
BBC thing?
it's the what?
The
I
BBC?
yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
Did
that
you
that
have
was
any
great.
involvement in that?
Yeah, yeah.
You
They
did. Okay.
we worked with the voice director Dirk Maggs,
Okay.
and he was in England. And the way I worked on the Superman books was that every Friday I would send a package to all the writers and artists of everything that came in that week. And he was trying to write and direct that show to come out right when Superman came back to life. So
Okay.
as I was sending packages to everybody else, I would send a package to him as well. So he was writing the story as we were writing it from what my guys were doing. And then I had to read the scripts. Roger Stern was writing the novelization of The Death and Return of
All right.
Superman at the same time. We were reading all that kind of stuff. We did trading cards. I was the editor of those as well. It was it was a
A
lot.
lot.
It was definitely a lot, but it was also that was adrenaline. It was just
Mhm.
like
Oh, sure.
this is an opportunity that does not come along and will probably never come along again.
Hmm.
But I got to be involved in those. And then weirdly, when they did that Superman, they did the animated movie called Doomsday before I got there. And there always seemed to be like there was a little dissatisfaction with it. Like the fans wanted it to be a more direct adaptation.
Yeah.
And as we got more popular with the streaming stuff, they said, let's do a two-parter. And they did Death of Superman and they did Reign of the Superman.
Right.
It is weird to be in on the same story 25 years later.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I think that the Death of Superman part is exactly the way it should be. The Reign of the Superman, they changed a little too much stuff, and I knew why they had to change a lot of things, partly because it
Hmm.
it starts becoming a Green Lantern story in our comic books, because that's
Sure.
what made him go crazy. And it's almost like they had to do something different there. But
Mhm.
did they come up with something that was good? Maybe. But I think they did the death and the funeral for a friend stuff perfectly. And
Uh,
it was weird to be involved in it,
Uh-huh.
but cool.
So were you involved in the artwork on that stuff too? On the animated stuff?
I guess, I mean, if something didn't look good, I could say, hey, don't do the guy like that. But
Hmm.
even that was rare because they're pretty great over there at Warner
Uh-huh.
Animation. They did great designs. If they changed something, it was for a reason. And and sometimes it was for because of a limitation in the animation, and but then there was some times where they would make a change and it would be like a mistake, but we all make mistakes. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
you gotta kind of pick your fights on that kind of stuff.
Were you involved in the recent Crisis on Infinite Earth set that
Yeah, but I will say that I was out the door as it was going on.
okay.
So I was there for the first part. I was there a big part of the second one, and I was not really there for the third one.
Okay.
And but the guy who got my spot was there helping me all along anyway, so he knew
Hmm.
what we were trying to do. And that's Mike Pilata, and
Uh-huh.
he does the audio things that you're talking about as well for DC. So he's a good guy, and yeah, there's some things that went on in that thing that I wish were a little different. Like
Uh-huh.
I would have designed the anti-monitor to look more like the guy in the comics,
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, we got a cartoon that had the Atomic Knights in it, so I'm thrilled.
Uh-huh. Well, you got the death of Barry Allen in there too,
Yeah, yeah, and
which was I really like that first part.
yeah,
Um, and I wasn't as hot on the other two parts, but the first part I thought was done extremely well. And it's a hard story, you know. I recently reread the comic
yeah.
within the past year or so, and I was buying it when it was coming out. And when I
Hmm.
was reading it recently, I'm like, God, I didn't notice that before. I didn't notice that before. And you think that Watchmen is so dense.
Yeah,
You've got to read it. It took me three times reading it before I understood what I was reading.
right.
And but Crisis is like that too, but I think that aspect over is kind of
I
overlooked.
talked to I talked to Jeff Johns about this at one point because when we were doing the Judas contract,
Uh,
I was like, when you read it all in one place, there's so many big gaps and things that just don't make any sense. And I ultimately was like, the Teen Titans don't even save themselves in this story. They get saved by, I guess, Jericho. But I was like, how come we don't notice this? And we landed on the idea that when there's a month in between each chapter, you fill in a lot of gaps.
yeah,
You fill it in subconsciously.
in your head.
You don't notice it. But now when you're reading all these things in a collected edition, it's it's just there. And as it's not as smooth as you think it is. And that's where you have to make adjustments. And when we did the animation, we had to make some adjustments. I felt it was important to actually make the Titans a big part of their own rescue too.
Mhm.
So and I think that cartoon worked out great.
Going back to comics, and one of the things that you mentioned the original Judas contract, and that was what was that, 82,
Yeah, that was like
83,
early
83?
80s. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a different way of writing comics then.
Hmm.
And we were talking a little bit, or I was asking about the changes in the 90s and the 80s and the 2000s. And it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a different style to all this stuff. And whether it's new people coming in or just the age you're writing it or what have you. And I'm curious when it comes to that stuff. I mentioned growth before, but I wonder what changes you saw, like maybe not happening right in the moment, but later on when you looked back,
Well,
where it's like, oh, there's this and there's this.
I think when you look at that Teen Titans stuff,
Yeah.
that felt different and new because it was being done by Marv and George, who had escaped Marvel,
Hmm.
and they came over and did what they did at Marvel. And they made a Marvel comic out of the Teen Titans. They made it a soap opera. It's their version of the X-Men that Chris Claremont was doing at the time. And that's why I think the Teen Titans X-Men crossover is the best crossover we ever did. It
Hmm.
was just perfect. And because the characters belong together, Superman and Spider-Man, not so much. And Batman and Hulk, not at all. But
No.
no, they don't belong together. Sorry. But it's just like, and then when I came over from Marvel and Byrne came over from Marvel, and all the guys I hired after Byrne, except for Ordway and Jurgens, they were all Marvel guys,
Right.
and including Kerry Gamble and Roger Stern and Louise Simonson and John Bogdanov and Ron Frenz even
Yeah.
eventually. And David Michelinie, this is a Marvel guy. These are guys. Well, again, he kind of worked at both companies. He started at DC, but anyway, the idea was I felt like we were doing, and I did think this at the time. I felt like we were doing the best Marvel comic out there when we were doing Superman
Hmm.
because it was a soap opera, and that's what Marvel was known for. That's what Stan Lee did. He put that kind of sensibility in there and made you feel like you had to buy Daredevil because it was in the same universe as,
Right.
you felt like you'd miss something if you didn't kind of get it all. And that was a smart marketing move, and it really was great. And I did feel like we were putting out the best Marvel comic at the time,
Hmm.
Superman. And I think that that's kind of what changed, but not everything at DC changed because of that. It wasn't a change in the company's style. Certain people brought what they thought they knew how to do, with them. When I came to DC, I had a chip on my shoulder because I got fired at Marvel. I felt like I had to show them that I knew what I was doing, and I had to really come out swinging. And obviously, like I said, when you're working with John Byrne, you don't mess with it too much.
Mm-hmm.
But the minute he left, that's when I felt like I became the editor of Superman. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like, and if I did anything right, I didn't drop the ball when they gave it to me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal. That should be the goal of everybody. But I just wanted to put out a comic book that I would want to read. And all of us on Superman, we were like-minded. We wanted to make sure that Superman wasn't left in the dust in the era of, straps and guns and all
Right.
this kind of stuff, and that his story stands for something still, whether you want it to or not. And but we found our way to do Superboy with straps and leather jackets, and
Yeah.
he was the
Oh, yeah.
modernization of a Superman character, and an attitude.
Have you seen, you said you've seen some of the new Superman stuff. You know that Superboy they've gone back to him being
Yeah,
Superboy. Um,
that's cool.
Yeah, I think with all of this stuff, it was funny. So I was a free comic book day last week,
Mhm.
and I was selling my book, and the comic shop I was at had me on top of the DC facsimiles,
Uh-huh.
and there was somebody who walked up, and I'm standing behind my big shelf of stuff, and somebody walked up and they just reprinted Man of Steel #1, the John Byrne one.
Oh, cool.
And this guy's looking at it. This kid is looking at
Yeah.
it. And I said to him, I'm like, well, I bought that when it came out, and the comic shop sold it to us for a dime because it was the first #1 Superman that had come out since comic books were a dime. So they
Yeah.
sold it to us for a dime. And if you had a 1962 dime, they'd give you two copies. Um, because there
Really?
was a difference. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was the
That's
only
fun.
good thing the guy who ran that comic shop ever did. But he did that, and he's like, "Oh, was this a big deal when it came out?" And I
Yeah.
said, "Yeah, it was a really big deal." And then I start babbling on and on and on. And I asked him, I said, "Well, what do you think? Do you like the pre-crisis Superman or the post-crisis Superman?" He's like, "Well, I like the post-crisis." And I'm like, "Well, why?" And he says, "It just makes more sense." And
Yeah.
I think that when it came to the stuff, what you guys were doing, it made sense. There was like a beginning, and I don't want to say an end because technically it still hasn't ended. But it was a straight line, and it wasn't going off in different directions. And I think that, if you don't mind me interjecting my opinion,
Your show.
well, when it comes to Superboy, I would do it way different than they're doing it.
Hmm.
I've given that thought, but that's neither here nor there. But I think this stuff all comes back around. Like Crypto was a big draw for that Superman
Oh
movie.
my God. I know. And
And
you can't even imagine crypto showing up in the Zack Snyder movies.
well, you could, he'd just be like chewing someone's head off.
Yeah. Well, no, they that was a genius move to
Yeah,
make
it really was.
a family-friendly franchise.
Well, it was a matter of making something fresh.
Hmm.
And even though it wasn't really, really, really fresh.
But
How
it's
much time
also
do
the
you have?
comic relief I was talking about. It's
Yeah.
like you need to have that, and that's the Zack Snyder stuff is to me just deadly. It's you know, it's a tone that just doesn't invite people in. You have to already be in to go along with that. And you know, crypto brings you in,
Right.
and it brings your wife in and your daughter and everybody in because everybody likes a dog. And that happens to be what my dog looks like.
Uh-huh.
And when I went to the premiere of Superman, that was my wife ran over to James Gunn to show him our dog.
Uh-huh.
So that was fun.
That's really cool. How much time do you have?
Well, what time is it? Oh, I
Uh,
probably should call it soon because it's
okay.
been 2 hours since we started. Even though the
Right, but
first
we talked
hour,
for like 45 minutes before, but yeah, we can wrap it up there.
well, we could do another one in a year.
Okay, why don't we do that? We're planning. Do you have your calendar?
Yeah, and I'm going to forget what I said this time, and
I know, and then we can
I'm
hear
going to
about the Julius Schwartz
tell you
shaving
about Julie
story again.
Schwartz's shaving again.
But yeah, I don't want to keep you. But I certainly enjoy talking to you very
Well, I
much.
hope whoever watches your podcasts and listens along or whatever, I just hope they have fun with it too, because, you know, ultimately, I think I'm boring.
Oh, I don't think you're boring at all, and I think that before we started, we were talking about one of my mentors, and I didn't get to finish this. The thing that when I was listening to your stuff yesterday and looking through his stuff, I was reminded of all of the lessons that he had given me. And I was getting those same kind of lessons just from listening to your stuff.
Oh,
And it
go
reminded me
on.
of that. Well, it's true. And I think that I like talking to people like this because there's a wealth of information you guys have. And if
Well,
it doesn't come out, it's gone.
we also, this kind of thing forces me to articulate what I thought that I might not have said at the time while we were doing it. It forces me to say, why did we do it that way? And it's good for me to relive things that worked and things
Yeah.
that didn't work. It's like it's a fun thing for me. It's really great to know that people, even if it's a little kid picking up a facsimile, that there's going to be somebody who's never seen this stuff. And now that we have these omnibuses coming out, and it's like I know it's reaching a lot of people who bought the floppy comics.
Uh-huh.
It's definitely going to reach some people who've never read the stuff. They've always heard
Mhm.
of it, and maybe they get it as a gift for Christmas because it's an expensive proposition. But people who were not there are going to be there for the first time. And
Right.
that's great that this stuff relives. Yeah, you're talking about how uh, writing changes over time.
Yeah.
One of the things that has changed writing, and this is a plus and a minus, is that everybody who writes comics now is aware that it could be a collected edition. So they're writing the stories in it with a different pace.
Hmm.
They're also writing it with a maybe an eye on two different audiences, that which makes you wall-eyed, which is a hard thing to do. And it's like it's not always going to work. And I think we accidentally did it, not knowing that the stuff could be collected ever in order, and that you would always have to kind of hunt down the triangle numbers. And and that in itself is a project, but some people like that kind of thing. But I also made a couple of mistakes with the triangle numbers, and that could screw people up. You know?
Well, one of the things I was trying to get an answer out of you that to see if you could connect the dots and that I would see something that I've missed and I wasn't it wasn't working. So I'm going to tell you why I was asking you all those questions
Okay.
and then we can wind it up.
And we
Uh,
can just agree that it's a failing on your side and not mine.
It's absolutely a failure on my side. I didn't get what I wanted. So I had spoken to one of your former colleagues about a year ago at a convention,
Mhm.
and she was looking at my work, and she's very, very, very nice. And I showed her the stuff I was working on. I showed her, the pencil work, and I showed her the stuff I had colored.
Mhm.
And she's like, well, she wasn't there to look at coloring, but she made a couple comments about the coloring, which actually has really helped my work. But some of the stuff she said made me think about coloring. And so I went and I took a look at the modern colors now.
Mhm.
And I don't know what the last comic book you got was, but the coloring right now at this moment in history is unlike anything I've ever seen. The colors are almost it if I wanted if it almost looks like a blind person put them together. And that sounds insulting, and I don't mean it like that, but
Uh-huh.
that's how vibrant and unexpected they are.
Uh-huh.
And so one of the reasons why I was asking you questions was, certainly there's the stuff in the 80s, and then the stuff in the 90s was, it was more art driven, we'll call it, if you
Hmm.
want to call it that. And then I think in the early 2000s, it was more writer driven. You had J. Michael Straczynski over at
Yeah.
Marvel, and you had, these people coming in from like the
Yeah, it
movie
was Jeff
business.
Johns and Brad Meltzer and
Yeah.
all these guys.
Right, right, right. And I don't really know what's happening right now. I'm still reading DC stuff.
Hmm.
Um for the most part. And so I'm aware of what's happening in the books. However, I don't really know where you would add things in, but I think that this particular moment in time, the color, and I don't think people are noticing it, which is one of the reasons why I decided to talk about it. It's off the charts. I've never seen anything like
But
it.
off the charts can be a good thing too, right?
Oh, it's absolutely a good thing.
Oh,
It's
good.
just it's taking risks in ways that you wouldn't expect it to take risks.
Well, that started happening when I was still editing. The colorists were, because they were doing the stuff through Photoshop and
Right,
being reinterpreted by a separator,
right.
third party, and was not even necessarily an artist. They were, getting the color guides that had secret codes on them that told people what to put down, at the at the comic book factory where they were printing the stuff. So, and they were famously known as, they hired housewives to do this stuff, and it just
Uh-huh.
not the
Right, right,
same.
right.
And now the guys who decide the colors are they're implementing the colors, and they are doing stuff with the Photoshop programs that are just gorgeous and beautiful.
Hmm.
It's an argument that I keep having and losing with DC. And I keep telling them that they've reprinted the death of Superman so many times now that they should have it recolored. Or no, they should have it reseparated. Take the old coloring that was printed as a guide,
Hmm.
interpret it with all the bells and whistles that you can do now, and have somebody come in and do that. And that way, the next time you sell it, it's fresh.
Yeah.
And maybe it reaches a new audience. Maybe it's another thing that somebody who's already bought it deems worthy enough to buy again. Whatever the reason, you're just not selling the same candy bar. You're
Right,
selling something with nuts on it. And it's like it's a new thing. And they, there's some purists involved who want it to be the way it was. And I'm like, it's already not the way it was. It's not on
right,
this print, and our color separations back then were just the beginnings of what they could do with Photoshop. And they're garish, and you're printing this on nice paper and it doesn't look the same. And it's like somehow, and I'm not saying you should do this to everything, even though I think if you took an old Kurt Swan job and recolored it with the modern coloring, you'd have something fresher,
right. And more
maybe more sellable.
actually.
Yeah, maybe, oh, but whatever. I don't think you should do it to everything, but you should do it to the stuff that you're reselling for the 10th time. And Death of
Yeah.
Superman has been reprinted so many times that it could, if people don't like the new coloring, they already have the other version. But
Hmm. Hmm.
so far, that argument
Right.
falls on deaf ears. Start the letter writing campaign,
Well,
everybody.
I know. Well, I real quick. So the first issue of my book came out a decade ago.
Mhm.
And after I talked to your former colleague, I took a coloring class through the Cubert School online. I looked at my artwork and I
Mm.
was like, this has to change. And I went back and recolored the whole first issue, and I'm going to recolor the whole thing.
That's
So,
great.
but because I agree with you though, something will look dated. I mean,
Yeah.
just something called color holds where they push something in the background by just changing the color of the line work just a little bit. It makes a huge difference.
Oh yeah. No, it's great for depth. It's just great for storytelling. I mean, I have a couple of things I can send you after this is over. I'll send
Yeah.
you somebody recolored some stuff from the Death of Superman, and I just think that it's amazing and fresh. And again, if it's something that DC is going to go back to the well on, I think
Mhm.
you got to kind of put some new water in the well because what's there is
Right.
evaporating.
Yeah, it just looks just freshen it up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, and I don't think you should do that with everything. I don't think you should do that just because you could recolor a Kurt Swan job.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I do think that basically it's, I don't know, people equate the idea to colorizing an old black and white movie and they say that that's wrong. And I'm like, you know what? Even when you do that, the black and white still exists. The
Right.
people who want the original feel of the Little Rascals can watch it in black and white
Hmm.
if they want to. But there's a lot of people on this earth who won't watch a black and white anything
Right. Right.
because they don't understand it.
Right.
And it's just like Marvel is doing some shows like that. They did Moon Knight, right?
Right.
It's a black and white show.
No, it was the monster one.
Oh yeah,
And I
it
can't
was
remember.
Werewolf by Night.
Yeah, Werewolf by
Yeah.
Night.
Yeah, so they did it both ways. And
Right.
it's like, okay, so choice is good.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Now, the only argument that DC could have is that it would cost them money to do that.
Well, it would absolutely cost them money to
But
do that.
they've made enough money off the death of Superman that they can afford to recolor. I
I don't know, maybe not.
don't know. I don't know. I do know.
Okay. So let's say goodbye to the audience, and then if you want to
Hi,
hold on
audience.
for a second, I'll thank you privately. But do you have anything new coming out? The last time you had the Triangle omnibuses coming out, are those still
Yeah.
coming out?
Yeah, there's the volume three is coming out. I don't think I have any stuff in it this time, which I'm really mad about. No, I'm not. I did an introduction for believe it or not, a Thundercats omnibus
Oh,
since I
cool.
was the original editor on the Thundercats comic. So I did that for what's the name of the company now? It's Nick Barucci's company, but it's just fun to just talk about what was it like back
Yeah.
then. It's fun and I know a lot of people skip that stuff when they get these volumes, and I know a lot of people who read it and just devour up all the behind the scenes stuff and
Mhm.
just love it. So it's fun to do that kind of stuff. And I did have my first page in Mad Magazine
Oh,
happened during the end of last year. Because Mad is still it's mostly reprint, but they're doing new material in every issue. And they asked me to pitch some stuff, and I pitched a page, and somebody else drew it, and it came out great. And
awesome.
it's in issue 46.
You
So
know,
there you
I
go.
hope you got to be careful not to announce that too much because they'll all sell out,
Well, I think that's been out for a while, so it may have sold out already.
maybe.
But yeah, I don't mind selling things out for them, and that maybe they'll say, "Hey, we this one page from Mike Carlin is what people are after."
Let's get him in here. Let's
Get
start his
more
career.
stuff. But yeah, Mad is like clearly that's like a mecca for a cartoonist or comedian.
Hmm.
Uh, it's why I ended up at Crazy Magazine because it was as close to Mad as I could get.
Hmm.
So it was fun. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, so I guess it's up to me to say goodbye. So
Yes. You should say
everybody,
goodbye soon because the
yes.
bathroom is calling.
Yes. So everybody, thank you very much for watching. We'll be back sooner rather than later because I have some people in the queue. But if you look for Mike Carlin's Mad Magazine and his Triangle omnibuses, his Superman Triangle, the Triangle era
Yeah.
omnibuses are out.
Do buy the Triangle Volume 3 and obviously Volumes 1 and 2 because I would just like to have all of that stuff in print
Hmm.
somewhere. And they're putting out an omnibus that goes between Exile and the first triangle numbers, called something. It's a Brainiac omnibus that comes
Panic in the Sky.
between them, and I'm hoping that they do an omnibus of the Burn stuff up to Exile
I
as
thought
the
they did
first.
that already.
I don't think they did an omnibus of Burn stuff.
Are you sure? I thought I
I'm
heard
not
something
sure.
about that, but I'm not
They
sure
don't
either.
send me these things. But yeah, no, I'm not sure. But I just think that if you keep buying the Triangle stuff, they'll do a volume four, they'll do a volume five, and they'll take it all the way up to when it stopped, and
Mhm.
that'll be great. And it's just great to have it out there. And by the way, even if you can't afford these things, because they are expensive, there are places that discount them heavily. There's also libraries, and libraries buy these kinds of books, and they have them there. So you can go to a library. Remember libraries? They are still there. You can go and read them there, and it's really fun.
And the Hoopla app has some of this stuff as well.
Oh, good. There you go.
So, and that's a library
That's a
app, and you
library
can
thing. Yeah, that's
look
like
at it.
Canopy and whatever. Yeah, great.
Okay, so we're going to call it quits here. Thank you everyone for watching, and the links will all be below, and I will see you next time.
I'll
Thanks
try
so
not
much.
to change my background so the continuity is
That's
steady
right.
through all these pieces. And